The United States Navy just suffered what military analysts are calling the most devastating technological humiliation in modern naval warfare history. The USS Theodore Roosevelt, one of America's 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers, sits crippled in the Arabian Sea at this very moment. Its propulsion systems compromised, its defensive capabilities neutralized, and its 90 aircraft rendered useless, all because of weapon systems that cost Iran less than the price of a single American fighter jet. What happened in the pre-dawn hours of May 5th, 2026 represents not just a tactical setback, but a complete strategic paradigm shift that exposes the vulnerability of America's entire power projection doctrine. And the mainstream media? They are scrambling to bury this story because what it reveals about American military decline and Iranian technological advancement shatters every narrative Washington has been selling for the past 2 decades. The Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group, accompanied by 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the USS Michael Murphy, USS John Finn, and USS Stockdale, plus the Ticonderoga-class cruiser USS Bunker Hill, was conducting what the Pentagon described as routine freedom of navigation operations 60 nautical miles off the Iranian coast near the Strait of Hormuz. But intelligence reports now confirm that the entire operation was actually a provocation designed to intimidate Tehran during sensitive nuclear negotiations. The strike group, valued at over $20 billion and carrying more than 6,000 American personnel, represented the most concentrated display of American naval power in the region since the Iraq invasion. Iranian military commanders watched every move through a network of coastal radar installations, submarine detection systems, and satellite monitoring capabilities that Western analysts consistently underestimate or dismiss. At 0300 hours local time, the Roosevelt's defensive systems detected multiple underwater contacts approaching at high speed from 3 different vectors. The carrier immediately went to general quarters, launching anti-submarine helicopters and activating its AN/SQS-53C sonar system, one of the most advanced submarine detection arrays ever developed. The escorting destroyers deployed their towed sonar arrays and began active pinging, flooding the water with acoustic energy, searching for hostile submarines, standard protocol for submarine threats. Except these were not submarines. They were something the American Navy had trained for but never actually encountered in combat conditions: fully autonomous underwater drones operating in coordinated swarm formations, specifically designed to exploit the acoustic signature vulnerabilities of American capital ships. What happened next over the course of 90 horrifying minutes was a systematic dismantling of American naval superiority. The Iranian underwater drones, intelligence suggests these are the Fateh II autonomous underwater vehicles unveiled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy just 8 months ago, approached the carrier strike group using what military experts call terrain masking, hugging the seabed, where acoustic detection becomes nearly impossible, then rising rapidly to attack depth only when within striking range. Each drone, estimated to cost between $200,000 and $400,000 to produce, carried shape-charged warheads specifically engineered to penetrate the double-hulled construction of modern warships. But destroying the ships was never the objective. Disabling them was. The first impact struck the Theodore Roosevelt starboard side, targeting the propeller shaft housings with precision that suggests either human guidance or artificial intelligence, far more sophisticated than Western intelligence believed Iran possessed. The explosions, relatively small by naval warfare standards, caused catastrophic damage to the carrier's propulsion systems without breaching the hull or causing flooding. Within minutes, the Roosevelt's 4 steam turbines began experiencing critical vibrations. The engineering crew attempted emergency shutdown procedures, but the damage to the shaft alignment meant that continued operation risked complete propulsion failure or even turbine disintegration. The carrier, capable of speeds exceeding 30 knots and able to launch aircraft while maneuvering at full power, became a floating 90,000-ton monument to American vulnerability. But the underwater assault was merely phase 1 of what Iranian military planners had designated Operation Tempest Shadow, a coordinated multi-domain attack demonstrating capabilities that defense analysts in Washington, Tel Aviv, and Brussels insisted Iran did not possess. As the Roosevelt's crew scrambled to assess damage and restore propulsion, Iranian coastal defense batteries launched waves of anti-ship missiles from positions deep inside mountainous terrain where American airstrikes cannot reach without risking massive casualties and international condemnation. These were not the aging Silkworm missiles or Chinese-supplied C-802s that Western media loves to mock. Intelligence reports identify them as the Qadir anti-ship cruise missile, an Iranian-developed system with sea-skimming capability, infrared homing, and terminal maneuvering specifically designed to defeat the Aegis combat system that American destroyers rely upon for fleet defense. The escorting destroyers immediately engaged, launching SM-2 standard surface-to-air missiles valued at over $1 million each. The Aegis system, considered the gold standard of naval air defense, tracked the incoming threats and allocated interceptors according to sophisticated algorithms prioritizing targets by trajectory and probability of impact. And here is where Iranian strategy revealed its brutal elegance. The anti-ship missiles were never meant to sink the American vessels. They were meant to deplete the interceptor magazines, forcing the destroyers to expend their entire stock of defensive missiles against threats that, even if they penetrated, would cause manageable damage to heavily armored warships. The USS Michael Murphy alone fired 43 SM-2 missiles in 18 minutes, exhausting 70% of its ready magazine against an attack wave that Iranian commanders knew the Aegis system could defeat. Stay with me, because what happens next exposes the fundamental vulnerability in American power projection that military strategists have been warning about for years, but political leaders consistently ignore. With the destroyer magazines depleted and the carrier immobilized, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps launched Phase 3, massed drone swarms from mobile launchers positioned across 5 provinces. Not the large Shahed 136 loitering munitions that have received so much attention in other conflicts, but smaller quadcopter and fixed-wing drones operating in coordinated formations of 30 to 50 units, each costing less than $5,000 to produce, each carrying small, explosive payloads or simply acting as electronic decoys, overwhelming the remaining defensive systems. The Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group, designed to project American power across thousands of miles and dominate any potential adversary, found itself completely neutralized by weapon systems that cost Iran less than $30 million to deploy in this single operation. The carrier's defensive systems can track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously, but they are optimized for high-value threats like aircraft and anti-ship missiles, not swarms of cheap expendable drones that saturate sensors and create targeting dilemmas. The close-in weapon systems, those rapid-fire phalanx guns that serve as last-ditch defense, engage the drone swarms with some success, but the sheer volume of contacts and the need to conserve ammunition against follow-on attacks meant that dozens of drones penetrated the defensive umbrella. The damage assessment remains classified, but sources within the Pentagon confirm that the Roosevelt suffered hits to its flight deck, arresting gear, radar arrays, and communication systems. None of the damage was catastrophic in the sense of threatening the ship's survival, but all of it was strategically devastating in terms of rendering the carrier combat ineffective. An aircraft carrier that cannot launch or recover aircraft, cannot defend itself, and cannot communicate securely with its battle group or shore command is not a symbol of American power. It is a floating liability, a 90,000-ton testament to the vulnerability of centralized high-value platforms in an era of distributed low-cost weapon systems. And while the Roosevelt sat crippled and immobilized, while American sailors worked frantically to restore systems and assess damage, while Pentagon officials convened emergency meetings in the middle of the night, Washington time, Iranian state media broadcast footage of the operation in real time. Not just radar tracks or animated graphics, but actual video from reconnaissance drones showing the American Carrier Strike Group under attack, showing the defensive missile launches, showing the chaos and the neutralization of American naval supremacy. The message to the world was unmistakable. The era of American carrier dominance is over, and Iran possesses the technological capability and strategic doctrine to deny access to any naval force that ventures into the Persian Gulf or Arabian Sea. Now let us talk about what this means for Israel, because the implications extend far beyond a disabled aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. For decades, Israeli security doctrine has rested on an unshakable foundation. American military supremacy guarantees Israeli survival. When Iranian proxies threaten Israeli interests, American carrier strike groups deploy to the region as deterrent and reassurance. When Israeli operations require coverage or support, American military assets provide intelligence, logistics, and, if necessary, direct intervention. The psychological impact of American carriers in the Mediterranean or Arabian Sea cannot be overstated. They represent not just military capability, but political commitment, the visible symbol that Israel does not stand alone against regional adversaries. The Roosevelt's neutralization shatters that perception completely. If a single carrier strike group, the most powerful concentration of military force ever devised by human civilization, can be rendered combat ineffective by weapon systems that cost less than the price of 2 F-35 fighter jets, then what security guarantee does American military power actually provide? Israeli military planners are conducting emergency assessments at this very moment, recalculating threat scenarios that assumed American naval power could always intervene to prevent regional adversaries from overwhelming Israeli defenses. Those calculations are changing rapidly and the political implications are seismic. Prime Minister Netanyahu's government has predicated its entire regional strategy on the assumption of American backing. The normalization agreements with Arab states, the aggressive posture toward Iranian nuclear facilities, the periodic strikes against Syrian and Lebanese targets, all of these policies assume that American military might would deter major retaliation or provide decisive support if deterrence failed. But deterrence requires credibility, and credibility requires capability, and capability just suffered catastrophic damage in the Arabian Sea. Arab states that were moving toward normalization with Israel, motivated partly by shared concerns about Iranian influence but equally by assessment of power realities, are now reassessing those power realities in real time. The United Arab Emirates, which signed the Abraham Accords in 2020 and has since developed significant economic and security relationships with Israel, released a carefully worded statement expressing concern about regional stability and calling for diplomatic solutions to tensions. Read between the diplomatic language and the message becomes clear. The UAE is hedging, preparing for a regional order where American military dominance can no longer be assumed, and Iranian capabilities must be accommodated rather than confronted. Saudi Arabia, which has been conducting quiet normalization negotiations with Israel for the past 18 months, postponed a scheduled high-level meeting citing scheduling conflicts. In diplomatic terms, this represents a complete freeze until the strategic situation clarifies. Bahrain and Morocco, the other Abraham Accords signatories, are maintaining official positions supporting regional peace, but intelligence reports indicate urgent reassessments of security arrangements and economic dependencies. These nations are small, vulnerable, and heavily dependent on regional stability for their prosperity. If American military power can be neutralized by Iranian capabilities, then the protective umbrella they believed they were joining by aligning with Israel suddenly looks far less reliable. The brutal calculus of regional politics is reasserting itself. Accommodation with the strong is safer than alliance with the declining. And it gets worse for Israel, much worse. The Theodore Roosevelt was not just providing general deterrence in the region. It was specifically positioned to support potential Israeli operations against Iranian nuclear facilities. Israeli military doctrine for strikes against deeply buried and hardened Iranian nuclear sites requires American support for tanker aircraft, intelligence assets, search and rescue capabilities, and most critically, suppression of Iranian air defenses during ingress and egress. A disabled American carrier cannot provide any of those capabilities. The massive intelligence infrastructure aboard the Roosevelt, the satellite communication systems, the airborne early warning aircraft, the electronic warfare capabilities, all of it is offline or operating at degraded capacity. Israeli Air Force planners had incorporated American carrier-based support into every operational scenario for strikes against Natanz, Fordow, and other Iranian nuclear facilities. Those plans are now worthless. Israel possesses capable military forces, but striking targets 1,500 kilometers away across hostile airspace against one of the most sophisticated air defense networks in the world without American support infrastructure transforms from difficult to nearly impossible. The operational window for preventing Iranian nuclear capability, which Israeli leaders have been threatening for 2 decades, just slammed shut with the sound of underwater explosions against the Roosevelt's hull. Let us examine the technology that made this possible, because understanding Iranian capabilities explains why this is not an isolated incident, but rather a preview of future conflicts. The Fateh 2 autonomous underwater vehicle represents a category of weapon systems that military strategists call asymmetric access denial platforms. They are designed specifically to exploit the vulnerabilities of high-value centralized military assets like aircraft carriers by attacking at costs so low that even successful defense becomes economically and logistically unsustainable. Each Fateh-2 drone, based on analysis of revealed specifications and observed performance, operates using a combination of pre-programmed navigation, acoustic homing, and what appears to be basic artificial intelligence for terminal attack phase. The drones do not require continuous communication with operators, making them immune to electronic warfare jamming that would cripple remotely piloted systems. They navigate to target areas using inertial guidance systems, then activate acoustic sensors to identify and classify targets based on propeller noise, hull resonance, and machinery signatures. The terminal attack phase, those final seconds before impact, uses shaped charge warheads optimized for underwater detonation against specific target types. The cost differential is staggering and strategically decisive. Iranian military sources claim production costs for the Fateh-2 range between $200,000 and $400,000 per unit. Even if we assume these figures are propaganda and actual costs are double or triple, we are still discussing weapons that cost less than $1 million each. Compare that to the defensive systems required to defeat them. The ANSQS-53C sonar system on American carriers costs over $180 million per unit. The towed sonar arrays on destroyers cost $30 million each. The SM-2 missiles fired in defense cost over $1 million per shot, and critically, detection and interception are never guaranteed. The underwater environment is acoustically complex, filled with thermal layers, biologics, and ambient noise that create detection challenges even for the most sophisticated sonar systems. Iran has been developing underwater capabilities for over 15 years, steadily improving autonomous systems, propulsion technology, and warhead design. Western intelligence consistently underestimated these programs, dismissing them as propaganda or assuming that sanctions would prevent Iran from acquiring necessary components. But sanctions forced Iran to develop domestic production capabilities and innovative workarounds. Components that Western nations import from specialized suppliers, Iran learned to manufacture locally or substitute with adapted commercial technology. The result is a weapon system that costs a fraction of Western equivalents but achieves its specific mission, denying American carriers access to the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea. The swarm drone tactics employed in Phase 3 of the operation demonstrate similar asymmetric logic. Small quadcopter drones using commercial components and basic guidance systems cost less than $5,000 to produce. They can be manufactured in quantity, stockpiled in distributed locations, and launched from mobile platforms that are nearly impossible to target preventively. A swarm of 50 drones costs Iran $250,000 to deploy, but forces American ships to expend millions of dollars in interceptor missiles and thousands of rounds of expensive ammunition. Even successful defense represents strategic defeat when the cost ratio favors the attacker by factors of hundreds or thousands to one. Now, what is Washington's response to this strategic disaster? Predictable panic, contradictory messaging, and desperate attempts to spin the narrative. The Pentagon released a statement acknowledging a maritime incident involving the Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group, claiming all personnel are safe and the situation is under control. Notice the language: maritime incident, not attack. Situation under control, not carrier combat effective. This is damage control in the most literal sense, managing domestic political fallout and attempting to preserve deterrence credibility, even as that credibility evaporates in real time. President Trump characteristically responded with contradictory signals that reveal the administration's complete lack of coherent strategy. Initial reports indicated he convened an emergency National Security Council meeting, reportedly shouting at military advisors about how this makes him look weak. Subsequently, he posted on social media claiming the Roosevelt incident was minor, that Iran would pay a heavy price for any aggression, and that American military dominance remains unquestioned. These statements convince no one, least of all adversaries who can see the satellite imagery of the immobilized American carrier being towed toward safe harbor by support vessels. Behind the bluster, the policy paralysis is evident. Military options for retaliation exist, but carry catastrophic escalation risk. Strikes against Iranian coastal defense batteries would require massive air campaigns against hardened positions in mountainous terrain, risking significant American casualties and potential shootdowns that would further humiliate American military prestige. Iranian air defense networks equipped with Russian S-300 systems and domestically produced variants would exact heavy tolls on attacking aircraft. And critically, any American escalation would trigger wider Iranian responses targeting American bases throughout the region, oil infrastructure in allied Gulf states, and quite possibly direct attacks against Israeli territory. The strategic trap is complete. Iran has demonstrated capability to neutralize American naval power at minimal cost, knowing that American retaliation options are either ineffective or carry unacceptable escalation risks. Trump, who campaigned on projecting strength and avoiding endless Middle Eastern wars, faces an impossible choice: accept humiliation and credibility loss, or escalate into a conflict that could spiral beyond any possibility of controlled resolution. His administration, already divided between hawks advocating massive retaliation and pragmatists urging de-escalation, is fracturing in real time as different factions leak competing narratives to friendly media outlets. Israeli officials are conducting urgent consultations with their American counterparts, desperately seeking reassurances that ring hollow against the backdrop of a disabled carrier. Defense Minister Gallant reportedly held 3 separate secure calls with Secretary of Defense in the hours following the attack, pressing for commitments to restore American naval presence and deter Iranian aggression. The responses he received, according to sources familiar with the calls, were long on rhetoric and short on operational commitments. The United States Navy does not have unlimited carrier strike groups to deploy. Moving another carrier to the region means leaving other areas uncovered, and doing so under conditions where Iranian capabilities have just been demonstrated creates risks that Navy leadership is deeply reluctant to accept. This is what military strategists call the tyranny of distance and the vulnerability of centralized platforms. American power projection depends on aircraft carriers because American territory is separated from most potential conflict zones by thousands of miles of ocean. Carriers solve this problem by bringing air power to distant theaters. But carriers are enormously expensive, require years to build, take decades to replace if lost, and represent concentration of assets that creates catastrophic single points of failure. The United States Navy operates 11 carrier strike groups globally. Losing even one to combat action would be devastating. Having one rendered combat ineffective by cheap autonomous weapons represents a vulnerability that cannot be easily addressed without fundamental changes to force structure and operational doctrine. Iran has been planning for this moment for 20 years, developing capabilities specifically designed to exploit American vulnerabilities while avoiding symmetric competition in areas where American advantages are overwhelming. Iranian military doctrine does not attempt to match American naval power ship for ship or aircraft for aircraft. Instead, it focuses on access denial, making the operational environment so costly and risky for American forces that political leaders become reluctant to commit them. This approach, often called asymmetric warfare or anti-access area denial strategy, transforms regional geography into strategic advantage. The Persian Gulf is an ideal environment for Iranian defensive strategies. It is shallow, narrow, and surrounded by Iranian territory, providing observation points, missile launch positions, and defensive depth. American carriers operating in the Gulf or even in the Arabian Sea near the Strait of Hormuz are within range of land-based Iranian missiles, drones, and now demonstrated underwater weapons. They cannot maneuver freely, cannot generate the operational tempo that makes carriers effective, and face threat environments that negate many of their technological advantages. For Israel, the implications extend beyond immediate security concerns to fundamental questions about long-term viability. Israeli strategic culture has always emphasized self-reliance and independent capability, but the reality is that Israeli security has rested on American guarantees since 1967. American military aid totaling over $150 billion over the past 50 years underwrites Israeli military superiority in the region. American diplomatic support provides cover for policies that would otherwise face international isolation. American military presence in the region deters adversaries from attempting the kind of coordinated assault that Israeli forces, despite their capability, might struggle to defeat alone. If American military power can be credibly challenged, if American carriers can be neutralized, if American willingness to intervene becomes questionable, then Israeli security calculations change fundamentally. Regional adversaries who have been deterred by fear of American intervention begin reassessing their options. Palestinian resistance groups, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syrian government forces, all of these actors operate under constraints imposed partly by Israeli capability, but equally by knowledge that American support makes Israeli defeat impossible. Remove or even just question that American backing, and those constraints weaken significantly.